Buenos dias, Central Church. Sorry, I had the switch for the Spanish microphone on, so I had to switch to English. Yeah, it's so good to be here, man. I'm happy to be here. It's so good to see everyone, man. You guys look so good from here. It's a phenomenal opportunity to be here. I want to honor this house. I want to honor my friends that are here, my family. It sounds weird, but it's the first time my parents actually get to see me, share a message here. So, I got to try a little harder, you know what I'm saying? But it's so good to be here, man. After hearing Lucas speak last week, I was like, oh man, I really got to bring the fire. He had people standing up in the front row, over in the back. I was like, man, I got to get my preach on, you know what I'm saying? But one of my biggest takeaways was the fact that he said that the Bible is for you. The Bible is not about you. And there are certain things in the Bible that, honestly, I've been in times where I feel like I'm, David, that I was like, I'm living the story of David right now, being persecuted, nobody likes me and stuff like that. Or, I feel like Moses wandering in the desert, I don't know. But it's definitely got some things that we can relate to. But we're in a series of moments, and I have the privilege of closing that out in the next 15 minutes. Praise the Lord. He can do it. He can use me in 15 minutes. Amen. Come on. We're talking about moments. And there have been defining moments in our lives. There have been defining moments in my lives, in my relationship with God, in my relationship, with my parents, with my friends, with my family. And I think all of us have had it as well. You've had defining moments with God. All of us have had career-defining moments at some points where we're just waiting for a breakthrough. We're waiting for something to happen. We're waiting for our breakthrough, which is that one opportunity, that one promotion. If I could just obtain that job, if I can just, get that girl, you know what I'm saying? If I could just, be there. But I want to show you a moment that happened February 1st, 2015. And I remember exactly where I was. I was sitting in my living room at my parents' house, and I was at the edge of my seat. And I was literally like this praying. I was like, God, I know you can work this. I know all things work together for those that love you and that are walking according to your purpose. I was watching the Super Bowl. So I want you to watch this clip. That was a defining moment right there. And I'm telling you, I was praying. I was like, God, please let the Patriots win. Now, hopefully there's no Seahawks fan here, right? No? Nobody? No? All right. Awesome. Yeah, but I want to talk to you about this next defining moment. It's found in the book of Joshua, chapter 14. We're going to read verses 7 through 15. And so if you have your Bible, you can turn it on, because I know nobody really carry Bibles anymore. I remember being in church when I was younger, and I heard that's not the case here this morning, right? All right, let's go ahead and dive into the word this morning. The title of my message is Defining the Promise. All right, and I want to read this to you. It says, "Now the people of Judah approached Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, said to him, 'You know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God at Kadesh Barnea, about you and me. I was about 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land, and I brought him back a report according to my convictions. But my fellow Israelites who went up with me made the hearts of the people melt in fear. However, I followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly.'" Next slide. "So on that day, Moses swore to me, 'The land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance, and that of your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years since the time he said this to Moses, while Israel moved about in the wilderness. So here I am today, 85 years old. I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You yourself heard then that the Anakites were there and their cities were large and fortified. But the Lord helping me, I will drive them out just as he said.' Then Joshua blessed Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and gave him Hebron as his inheritance. So Hebron has belonged to Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, ever since, because he followed the Lord, the God of Israel, wholeheartedly. Hebron used to be called Kiriath Arba, after Arba, who was the greatest man among the Anakites." And I want to talk to you about, I want to break down this story. This is actually a phenomenal story, one of my favorites. We usually, if you've heard the story before, it's talked a lot about Joshua. And we talk about Joshua all the time. And you know the verse, Joshua 9 says, "Be strong and be courageous, for the Lord is with you," all right? And he says, just as I was with Moses, I'll be with you. But we tend to overlook Caleb. And so the first thing I want to talk to you about today is receiving the promise. And I want to give you a context behind what happened here, because there were moments before that led to this specific moment. All right? And if you know this story, you know that the people of Israel were wandering in the desert for about 40 years. And at some point in time, Moses, when they saw the promised land, they told Joshua and Caleb and 10 other people, be like, "Hey, go bring us a report. Go tell us what you see. Go do a scouting report." And if you can throw verse 7 back up there, I'm going to read it for you one more time. And I want to give you more context. It says, "You know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God at Kadesh Barnea." Notice that city because I'm going to talk about it. It said, "I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land, and I brought him back a report according to my convictions." I want to let you know that Caleb saw the same miracles. Caleb saw the column of fire overnight. Caleb saw the manna fall from heaven. Caleb saw the water come out of the rock, but so did the other 10 people that brought back the report. They saw the same fruit of the land. They saw the same giants. However, I love the fact that it says, but Caleb was of a different spirit. Caleb was of a different faith. And I want to let you know this morning that it is your convictions that dictate how we respond to moments of faith. It is your convictions that you have. It is what you believe that define your response to defining moments. And I was wondering as I was reading this, why, if Caleb saw the same thing and so did the other spies and so did the rest of the people of Israel saw the same thing, why did they bring back a different report? Why did they see something different? And it was because of the convictions that Caleb had. Caleb had a relationship with God. Caleb had a moment with God. And I love that we see here in this passage, it says that he followed the Lord his God wholeheartedly. And I want to let you know this morning that receiving the promise comes as a result of following the Lord wholeheartedly. Receiving the promise comes as a result, as a byproduct of following God, of being obedient, of being faithful, and serving to him wholeheartedly. We see this so many times in this passage. I'm pretty sure I read it like 3 to 5 times where it says, and you know that I've served the Lord, my God, wholeheartedly. And that's just to let you know that where you are right now matters. Where you are right now in life matters. Not every moment with God might be memorable, but every moment with God is a defining moment. And we see it here. And we see it all throughout the Bible. So Caleb received the promise when he was 40 years old. I got about 12 years till I'm there. So I wonder how far I am into my journey. And as I was reading this story, I was talking to one of my friends, and I was telling them, I was like, I wish we had a process meter of like what percentage I'm in. You know what I'm saying? You know how if you ever played a video game before, it tells you like what completed percentage you have. I wish I was like, well, 10 years ago, you were at 20%. And now 8 years later, you're at 25. Yeah, just so I can know where I'm at. I think that would be really helpful. And if you've been in ministry long enough, you'll probably wonder and felt the same thing. I was like, God, am I like, it just feels like I'm updating my computer, with this process that you and I have going. It says 10 minutes, but it's been like, 30 minutes. So he received the promise when he was 40 years old. And if we go back to verse 10, I want to read you this. Because although he received the promise didn't happen automatically. He had to wait on that promise. And I want to tell you the story as we go on. I remember I was born and raised in the church, so I always sat. Actually, my dad played the drums for the church in the longest. So I remember when there was nobody to babysit me, I sat behind the drum cage, and I would watch him play drums during service. And then I learned how to play the drums just by, just watching him play. But I remember falling asleep plenty of times, and I probably have hearing damage, because I was so young and I heard the drums. But when I grew up, and it was around 2010 when we started the church. If you don't know, my parents are pastors. They're pastoring a small Hispanic church called Familia de Dios. Shout out. And that's where I started my journey. That's where it all started. And I remember, since I have the use of reason, I would pray to God. I was like, God, if coming to church and playing the drums is all you have for me, then I don't want it. I don't want to come every Sunday and sit behind the drum cage or play the same songs. Back then there was no tracks. Some of you guys don't know. We didn't have the confidence monitors. We didn't have the cool screens. I was using a keyboard that barely worked. A drum set that barely sounded good. But hey, we did it wholeheartedly, all right? But my prayer was, God, if this is all you have for me, then I don't want it. That's it. And my parents don't know this is the first time knowing, but so we'll probably have a conversation later. No, I'm just kidding. They didn't know, and I prayed this for 4 years. And I remember a defining moment for my life was in December 2nd of 2012. And I remember there was this guest speaker that came to our church, and I remember him. His name is Henry Viela, and he was God used him with word of knowledge. So I don't know if you've been in church long enough, you know that people line up all over the front, and then they're expecting to hear from God a prophecy or, something about your future or what God has for you. And so I remember the line was huge. And I lined up at the very end because I was like, there's no way he's going to skip me if I line up at the very end. I'm the last one. He's got to pray for me. And I don't know if you've ever been in that case where you're really waiting to hear from God and you're lined up here at the front and you just feel skipped. And I remember in the morning service, he prayed for everybody. It was the longest altar call of my life, probably like 45 minutes, just person by person. And I was hearing what God was telling to the other people, and I'm like, I can't wait to hear what God has for me. And so it gets to the person right next to me, and they have their hands lifted up, they're praying, they're crying, and he's prophesying over them. And then I'm like, and the next thing you know, I hear, let's give a round of applause to Jesus. He has been good. We have to end. It's already time. I was like this. I was like, no way he skipped me. So I was all right, God, maybe you don't have something for me right now, but maybe later. And I remember I went to with my buddies at the church. So it was football season, so we were, watching football. And I get a text from my dad. He was like, hey, that same speaker is going to be our partner church friend. He's 5 minutes away from where we're at. And I was like, say less, I'm there. And so I sit through another worship service, more songs, and then time for the message, and then the altar call. And I did the same thing. I was like, he cannot skip me this time around. He knows me. He's seen me. He's got to pray for me. And then sure enough, second and last person, same thing. He's praying for him. And he walks towards the stage. And in my mind, I said, all right, God, I see how it is. I did. And so I turned, and so then I was like, all right, guys, see how it is. And then as I look up, I see him turning around and walking towards me. And I was wondering, did I say it out loud? Did my intrusive thoughts win and escape my mind? And then he laid his hands on me, and he told me verbatim the prayer that I have been praying intimately with God. It says, you've been asking God for something specific. You don't want to be a drummer for the rest of your life. And in that moment was when everything changed. And let me tell you that is unless that you connect with Jesus, unless you connect with him, you won't be able to connect to his purpose. Unless you have an encounter with Jesus, you won't be able to encounter your purpose in life. And I received the promise. It was 2012, and it has now been 11 years later. And I'm like, I've seen how God faithful is. I've seen how good he's been in my life. And I've seen how he's brought me through so many things and so many trials. And I'm thankful. And as I was preparing this message, I heard God tell me something that broke my heart, and I might actually tear up. But he was telling me, you can sing all the songs. You can play all the right chords. You can pray for people and they will heal. You can pray for others to receive what they're praying for and they will receive it. You can do all this, miracles, and you can do healings, and you can do wonders. But if your heart's not in it, then I'm not there. And so we see in verse 10 that Caleb is in Kadesh Barnea. And let me tell you what that means. That means the holy place of the desert of wandering. The holy place of the desert of wandering. While Caleb was in the desert, God was with him. Even when it feels like you're wandering in the desert, God has set apart a place to meet with you, to encounter with you, to find you exactly where you are. And let me tell you, friend, it doesn't matter where you encounter yourself in life. God will meet you where you are. You don't have to be good or wait to be good in order for God to come to you. And it is oftentimes that we fall in love with the promise that we forget the pain of the process. We fall in love with the promise and forget the pain of the process. We see Caleb receiving his inheritance, but we forgot the 40 years in the desert. And we forget the 45 years that it also took waiting for that promise. Let me tell you that when you fall in love with the process, this is going to help you out. You love what the process produces. When you fall in love with the process, you learn to love what the process produces in your life. And your posture during the process determines your ability to steward the promise. how you postured yourself during the moments of harshness, during a difficult time, how you posture yourself in the waiting determines how well you steward the promise. And I want to remind you of something this morning. Never underestimate who God has called you to be. Just let that sink in for a moment. Don't underestimate who God has called you to be. And so you see, Caleb called back the promise. He said, here I am today, 85 years old. And he says, I am still strong today as I was back then. I know nobody here is 85, for a fact. All of you guys look so young. But let me tell you, even if you were, you can still say, hey, even I'm still strong today as I was last time. I want us to read verse 12 and 12 right here in the screen. And as I read this, I would want the worship team to come up and start playing behind me so I can, finish up. It says, now give me this hill country. This is Caleb reminding Joshua of the promise. Give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day, for you yourself heard that the Anakites were there and their cities were large and fortified, but the Lord helping me, I will drive them out. The promise never comes without a fight. The promise never comes without a fight. And God has called you, God has called us to fight for our promises. And I want you to just to listen carefully to what I'm about to say next. There's a song that says, this is how I fight my battles, right? I love that song. And a lot of the times Christians, we have to say this like, oh, well, I'm just fighting the good fight. How are you? Blessed, highly favored, and I'm fighting the good fight, and we're moving forward, and everything is good. Well, let me break this truth to you. God will never fight a battle for you that you're not willing to stand in. Caleb had to stand his ground, even though he already had the promise. The war for the promise has been won, but there's still a battle that you and I need to fight for our promise. Yes, God is gonna fight your battles. Yeah, He goes behind us, He goes in front of us, He goes around us for our children and the children of our children. But God will never give you a victory over a battle you're unwilling to fight. God will never give you a victory over a battle you're unwilling to fight. We have to stand and claim our promise. And I remember it was August 1st, 2022, and we had the privilege of attending Teen Church Conference in Seattle with our staff at the time, and I was going through internal conflict. And in that airplane ride, it was one of my favorite things to do is just fly really early in the morning, also known as red-eye flights. Let me tell you, airports are my favorite. Like people watching, phenomenal. Especially at like 4 a.m., you see all kinds of things. Remember we hopped on this plane, and then I had my headphones on and I prayed to God. I was like, God, I need clarity for my life. Because although I had received the promise 10 years ago in December 2012, here I found myself in August in 2022, doubting myself, doubting the promise that God had laid over my life. And full transparency, I didn't want to do ministry anymore. Just be honest, right? Is that cool, or like, should I not have, right? Like, 'cause we all feel that way, right? Hopefully, right? And if you're not, don't worry, we're talking about honesty next week, and yeah, don't miss out. But I just didn't want anything to do with it anymore. I was tired of it. And I remember being in the worship set, just with a lot of questions and doubts. And it was in a moment during worship that I, for the first time, heard this song. And he said, "Christ is my firm foundation. He will never let me down." And I was like, that's cool, that's biblical, right? As every song should be. But then the bridge was when God just came and spoke to me and reminded me verbatim of the promise of what he had said 10 years ago. And that bridge says, "Rain came, wind blew, but my house is built on you." And it was then that I was reminded of my purpose, and I was reminded of how good and faithful God has been to me these years. And I caught a second wind, which is the same thing that I see here with Caleb. And at the end, we see that Caleb, he fought for the land, but he didn't do that for himself. Let me tell you that the choices you make today have eternal implications. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. Caleb didn't drive out the giants for himself. He drove the giants out for his descendants. And I know it's not on the screen, but I read it. If you go back and read it, at the end it says, "And the land had rest from war." There are battles that you are currently fighting that are not for you. They're for your descendants. There are things that you're dealing right now that you need to defeat, that you need to overcome, not for you, but for those coming after you. The battles that God calls you to fight, that God calls us to fight, are not for us. They're for others. And I believe that fulfillment comes when we live a life of service. When we go to somebody and be like, "Hey, how can I walk with you? How can I walk this out with you? What are you struggling with? What can I do for you? How can I pray for you?" So I want to invite you to stand this morning, and I want to pray for you. And I want to do 2 altar calls. One of them is for those that are here, that those of us that have been wandering through the desert and have been damaged by life, and we need to release that. In order for you to be able to receive the life that God has for you, you have to surrender yours. It's an exchange. And so this is my favorite part. I want to pray for you. I want to pray for you. And if you've been through some hurt, this is your time where you need to let it go. And I was hearing 2 things as I was preparing this message, and 2 phrases. One of them is, God's not done writing your story. And the other one is, you have something to give. You're here because you have something to give. So I want to invite you to come out to the front this morning. If that's you, come on, I want to pray for you. And I want to encourage you, and I'm here to tell you, you have not missed your moment. If you haven't had your moment, God is here and God will meet you where you are. But I want to encourage you, come out to the front. If you need prayer, I will personally pray for you. Come on, sing.